morning, everyone. I was just thinking as the service was progressing that our whole service is an example of the gifts working together. We had Jake who chose some music for us, and he's got a real skill in the whole music area, in the tech area. Serena contacted the organizational team and said, "I'd like to do a pastoral prayer this Sunday." And again, that was the right thing. And Gudrun contacted us, and it was an unusual thing. And she said, "I just feel I need to bring this certain lesson to the church this morning." And again, it was just the right thing for this morning. And so we're operating like a New Testament church. It says one brought a song and one brought a word. And so God is using all of these gifts that he has put in us and is bringing them all together to accomplish his purposes. And so you can see from the title slide that our focus today is working together. And as an illustration of how God uses us in different ways, I want you to imagine that you're walking into a coffee shop. This happens to be a trendy place in LA, and just serves as an example of a nice coffee shop. Now, if my family was walking in here into this coffee shop, I can tell you exactly what would happen. Me, the structural engineer, I'd be looking and say, "Oh, look at those concrete columns and the concrete beams and then the wood across the top. And I wonder how they support it on the right-hand end where all that glass is." And Heather would be beside me and she'd walk in and say, "Oh, look at the colors. Oh, I think that's the Benjamin Moore color of the year, number 26713. She'd be talking about the materials. And then if Ben was with us, he'd come in and say, "I wonder what their business model is. I wonder how they make this work financially." And we would have all these different perspectives on how this would work. And then I can imagine, and then of course we check out the menu and look at the coffee and the cookies, but we have these different perspectives on how we would see that very same thing and interpret that very same experience. Now, if you were going to build a coffee shop like this, you know what? You would need people with all of those different skills. You see, you need to make sure that the space was structurally sound. If it wasn't, the city wouldn't even give you a business license so you could open. And if it wasn't designed so that it was attractive and the colors worked and the layout worked, well, customers wouldn't come in and you'd be closed within a month. And if you didn't have something with Ben's talent for understanding business strategy, you'd run out of money in a few months and you'd be closed again. And so to make this work, you need all of these very different points of view. Now, maybe you're on, and somebody else would be thinking about the coffee machine. That'd be maybe Blake, my other son Blake, and his wife Annie. They'd be thinking about, well, it's got to have good coffee. And so these things are a little bit in conflict, because if you want to buy the latest, greatest, fanciest coffee machine, that's going to cost a lot of money. So then that's going to impact your business model. Or you want really classy materials and so on, that's going to raise the cost. Or the structural guy says, well, maybe you need a column right here so it doesn't all fall down. But the visual person says, no, we want this open so that it gives a certain appearance. And you see right away that those things can be somewhat in conflict. And so the trick is, when you're working, when the gifts work, is for them to work together. And that sometimes means that they have to find compromises. They have to find ways to work things out between them. You need all of those gifts. Without all of them, the coffee shop is not going to open and operate. And yet, if the individuals are not willing to work with the other people, it won't happen. Now, we've been talking about different kinds of gifts, and I just want to sort of highlight these various gifts. So we've already talked about the motivational gifts, and we've covered most of these. intercession, prophecy, service, teaching, encouragement, giving, administration, mercy, hospitality, and the artisan gifts. Now, you may remember that a number of weeks ago when we started this series, we imagined somebody that had a plugged sink. And remember how all these different gifts operated in that situation. Somebody was sweating over the fact that the sink didn't work, and somebody that had the gift of teaching said, well, I read that you shouldn't pour fat down the sink because it'll clog it up. And the administrative guy said, well, let's get all this stuff out from under the sink so we can start to work on this. And the person with the gift of mercy went over and took Mom's hand and said, oh, don't worry about it, Mom. We'll get this all figured out. And you need all of those things, and they all work together, and they bring different perspectives. And when all of the gifts are present, then you have a full set of skills, and you have the full package that you need to bring harmony and progress to that situation. As I was thinking about these different categories of gifts this week, I thought, what happens when somebody uses one of those motivational gifts? And I realized that they discover something about who they are. You know, I worked at the university for a long time, and eventually I came to see I really am a teacher. That really is my best calling, or one of my best callings. And I started to understand, oh, that's why when I'm in those settings, I seem to succeed. And those motivational gifts are part of what the theologians call the imago Dei, that is the image of God. And God has made each of us different, but we each have aspects of God's personality that are stronger in our own lives. And if we can identify them and operate in them, then we can bring a great deal to not just the body of Christ, but to our neighbors and our friends and our family and our life groups. And those things, if you like, come from God. They're part of how God made us. Then we come to the equipping gifts. And these are intended, the way the passage is worded in Ephesians, it talks about these people as if the people themselves are the gifts. And so they are like the tools that you need to repair that sink. And when they are developed in their gifts, then they help the believers to be well equipped to do their own jobs. And they bring unity in the faith, and they bring maturity. These are the people who help to develop the other individuals around them so that they can develop in maturity, and they can operate as completely as possible in their own giftings. And these gifts are sometimes called the Jesus gifts. And in a moment, we'll see why. And if you like, when these people operate in their gifts, they understand, why am I here? The second fundamental question that everybody asks. And I've seen people who are teachers, or even when I'm at the university, and I think, why am I on this earth? And I'm in the middle of teaching, I somehow know, I know why I'm here. This is why God put me on this earth, so that I can help people to understand. And then the last group of gifts is what we call the manifestation gifts. And these are different again. They're a completely different category. And the analogy that I used when we had our introduction to this series was they're kind of like the teenager girl who comes along and dad's under the sink trying to fix the sink, and she pulls out her cell phone and she starts going to YouTube and she says, oh, here's how this has to be done. Or if these guys can do it, then we can do it too. And it's the thing that makes these gifts unique is that they're sort of over the airwaves, just like a cell phone connects through the airwaves. And these manifestation gifts are things that God reveals. They are supernatural things. And they do a couple of things. Besides providing the information or the functionality that's needed, they bring a new level of experiencing God. And they change the spiritual atmosphere. And so these gifts are from the Holy Spirit, and they answer the question, where am I going? Now, you might say, how is that? I remember the first time that I saw somebody healed. And it was a miraculous healing, and I don't want to go into all the details about it, but the group of us that were in the room when we saw God do this healing, a couple of us were praying for somebody. It totally changed who we were. We saw God reach into this physical world and do something that no human could ever do. And God brought about this visible healing in the person. It was a kind of a malformation, and we could actually see the change that happened. We knew in a way that we had never known before that there was a God. And we knew that God had visited us at that moment. And we could never go back. If someone said, oh, there really isn't a God, it wouldn't matter how much they argued and talked. We knew way deep inside that there really was a God. And that's one of the things that this group of gifts does. Besides the knowledge or the act of healing or whatever that it brings, it does this more fundamental thing about changing who the people in the room are and changing the spiritual atmosphere. Now, I want to take just a few moments to talk about that middle set of gifts, that is the equipping gifts. And by the way, I'll just go back here. I want to mention that we've already talked about the first two categories of gifts. And today's message serves to tie the series together. So the series is going to go for about another 3 weeks, and Jake and Serena are going to talk about the manifestation gifts. And if you imagine a person that's wearing some clothing, the introduction was kind of like talking about the head. And then as we've talked about motivational and equipping gifts, they've kind of been like the person wearing some clothes on the top. And today's message, which kind of fits between the first two categories and the next one, is kind of like a belt that goes around a person's waist to kind of keep everything together. And then we're going to talk about the manifestation gifts, which will cover the rest of the person's clothing, if you like. And so that's where today's message fits in. It's kind of like a belt to keep it all tied together as we're going along. All right, so again, just a little side thing about the equipping gifts, and we've covered 4 of the 5. The prophetic gift we'll talk about next week. But it says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Remember, I said these are sometimes called the Jesus gifts. And the purpose is to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. And so here's a little picture of what these equipping gifts are like. I want you to imagine camp, and there are a bunch of kids at the camp, and the night is starting to fall. And so people with these different gifts will treat this situation in a different way. One of the people, and we'll maybe call his name Sam, he says, you know what, it's getting dark and who knows what's out there in the darkness. Let's all gather around the campfire. And the campfire will keep us warm and it'll be a safe place for all of us to be. And maybe he'll even talk to the kids. It's an equipping gift. And so maybe he'll talk to the kids and say, look, here's how you build a fire. You put these sticks here and these sticks there, and then you put some paper or some birch bark underneath, and you build it in this way. And so he's instructing the kids, and he's helping them to understand so that someday they can do the same thing. That's what Sam is doing. He's thinking about how to keep the kids safe. And then there's maybe someone else. I needed a name with T, and I happen to like this name. And any similarity with somebody you know is entirely unintentional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Teresa is thinking, you know what, something else. She's saying, I should teach these kids something so that they know how to build a shelter. Maybe sometime they'll be stuck somewhere and they need to build a shelter. So I'm going to teach them how to do these knots. They would be useful so that they could build something, or they could use them when they go out and are fishing or something. And then the next person comes along, and his name is Evan. And he says, you know what? As we were coming to our camp here, I saw some other people and they looked like they were lost, or maybe somebody was hurt over there. I know it's evening, but I still think we should go out and we should go back to where they were and we should help them out. They might be lost over there. Patty, one of the other counselors says, you know what? I have a map, and this map will show us where to go. So, Evan, we could do what you're saying. And look, this map shows where the hills are and where the valley is. And there's this river that we need to go around, and it'll show us where to go and how to get there. And finally, the last person, we'll call him Andy. He's got a set of binoculars, and he's been looking all across the valley in all different places. And he's thinking, you know what? I had a look at some of these places. I can help us to figure out where to go. And right away, you see that these actually represent the 5 equipping gifts: shepherd and teacher, evangelist, prophet, and apostle. That's exactly what those different gifts do. The shepherd and the teacher are thinking about protection and looking after the sheep and teaching them and keeping them safe. And in contrast to that, we have the evangelist. He's thinking, yeah, that's a good thing to do, but we need to go out. We need to go out to our neighborhood. We need to talk to that neighbor. We need to take a chance on talking to them. We need to get out of our comfort zone. And the prophet is saying, yeah, and God's showing us how to do it. He's giving us some clues. He's showing us what the lay of the land is, so we know how to do this. And finally, the apostle, he's looking way into the future, and he's looking at some brand new techniques for doing evangelism or for doing whatever. And so you see that there's a little bit of tension between these 2 categories, even within the equipping gifts. And so the important thing is then for these people with these 5 different gifts to learn to work together. It says, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? And you see that for this fellow on the left to be able to lift that heavy weight, he needs all of these parts of his body to work together in a coordinated way. He needs arms to lift that weight, but if he had 6 arms and no legs, he wouldn't be able to do it. He needs the right number of legs, the right number of arms, and they need to work together in a coordinated way. And you know what? God has given Trinity a lovely collection of gifts. This is a pie chart that Jake put together that summarizes the surveys that you did. So many of you did the Wagner Hout survey, and then you sent your information into the church through the link, and then Jake put together this pie chart. And you see we've got lots of teachers and lots of wisdom. And that should be the case, because Paul says that he wishes that we would become mature and that we would be teachers and that there would be wisdom in the body. And so you see that has in fact happened. And we've got lots of people with helps and exhortation and so on. We've got a lovely collection of these gifts. So we've got enough arms and enough legs. And the point is to make them operate together in a coordinated way so that we can lift the weights that God has given us to lift as a church. But these gifts can also operate on an individual level. And I'm going to talk about a scenario here. And I should just mention that a number of years ago, actually back in 94, I listened to a message by a Richard Sipley. And if you go online, you can actually find his messages, his audio messages. and they're worth listening to. But suppose if somebody is in the hospital, I'm going to go through this really quickly just because of the time, but if somebody's in the hospital, you might have somebody with a shepherding gift go and visit them. And you don't have to go to the hospital. You might have a neighbor who's feeling depressed because of COVID, or a neighbor that just would like a friendly word. So these things don't have to apply to a hospital setting. But in a hospital setting, the person with the shepherding gift will go in, and they will make that person feel like somebody cares for them. The shepherd is the person who looks after the sheep, and they'll say, "How are you doing?" And that person in the hospital knows that they're not alone and forgotten. The person with the gift of encouragement will go in, and they will help to cheer that person up. Imagine you're the person in the hospital bed, or you're the neighbor who's feeling lonely. Do you think these gifts are of value? Absolutely. Person with the gifts of help and service will go into visit this person in the hospital, and they will say, "Oh, there's a Tim Hortons downstairs. Would you like me to run and get you some good coffee from down there?" All right? That's the kind of thing that they do. And the teacher will come in and they'll say, "Oh, I heard about what you have, and can you tell me more about it? I'll do some reading about it and see if I can find out anything that'll help you when you get home so that this won't happen again." The person with the gift of healing may go in and say, "You know what, let me pray for you and see what God will do to get rid of this sickness, to speed your healing." And you know what? The people with the gift of giving and the apostle gift, they may not go in. That's not their calling. And if they go in, they'll stumble around and look at the floor and look out the window, and they won't know what on earth to do. But you know what? The hospital visits may be not their calling, and that's okay. I've worked in lots of different settings where people meet together in a group and have to make important decisions. And there are a lot of ways that these kinds of meetings can come down. I've been in secular settings where some of the attitudes that were present are these. One person's thinking about themselves. Another person has pride and they're motivated by ego. Another person is maneuvering, is trying to get a particular outcome. And maybe these two are in collusion. They had a talk before the meeting came down, and they said, "Listen, if we work together in this way, we can bring about a certain result." And in a really bad meeting, the person who's in charge will say, "You know what, I'm the boss, and this is what we're going to do because I'm the boss," pulling rank. And if you have that kind of a meeting, you end up with competition and deal making. And I've been in lots of those meetings. And usually the result is not very good. But you know what? In a Christian in a Christian setting, God does something that totally changes how everything works. If we submit ourselves to Him and we understand that we are a family under God, then the boss will say, and it starts with the leader, "Let me serve." And then instead of selfishness, that person can be filled with love and can operate from that point of view. And instead of pride, we have mutual respect. And instead of maneuvering, we have deference one to the other. And instead of collusion, we have caring and cooperation. And when this is the situation, everything is just much more peaceful and you bring about a really good result. I've sat in lots of elders meetings at Trinity, and I'll tell you that this is how they operate. The people are submitted to God, and God brings all of their different giftings. One person is thinking about evangelism. Another person is thinking about the finances. Somebody else is thinking about how are we actually going to do this, because they have an administrative gift. But they work together in an incredible way. And the result can be very, very good. But it's because Jesus is present. It's because these people have submitted themselves to God. And so God brings about this gathering in a totally different way. Here's another example. we often have worship teams at the church. And you know what? The keyboard players, they like to play in flats. And guess what? The guitarists, they like to play in sharps. And so do the violinists and the viola players. They like sharps. And then the singer wants to sing it have the music in a certain range. And of course, you don't want just monotone, you want harmony. And so the lead singer doesn't want the song pitched too high, and the harmony people don't want it pitched too low because then they can't sing their notes. And so you have to have a talk, and you have to figure out what key are you going to do that music in so that the instruments are in their proper ranges and the voices are in their proper ranges. And they all have to work a little bit when they're at the front, because I'm not used to playing in four sharps, but I'm going to try and work this out. I'm going to play the keyboard and I'm going to try and do it. And so everybody's working together to bring about a good result. And people in the congregation said, oh, I really felt God in that song and helped draw me to the Lord. But what you don't know is all that went in the background and how they chose to work together so that that could happen. Here's another example. This is just a shot from the October food drive, and all kinds of gifts are present here. And this is, again, all kinds of gifts are present in order to make that event happen. Now, some of you know I like object lessons, and so I'm going to unshare my screen here, if I can get this going. And I just want to show you a little example, a little bit of an object lesson here. So if you'll just be patient, I'm just going to set this up. I never got to play with Lego as a kid. We for some reason didn't have Lego. So when my kids were old enough, we bought Lego. so the kids and their dad could play Lego. Anyway, I want you to just, yeah, there we go. I want you to just imagine that you had some Lego blocks, and you know, this might be the gift of teaching. And so you could have some more teaching and lots more teaching, and you could start to build something with all those gifts of teaching. And maybe we'll put a corner on here. There we go. And you could build something out of the Lego. And, you know, maybe some of the teaching gifts are bigger than some of the others. And so that's nice because then you can add some interesting details to this little thing. And you could build something like this. It's real and it maybe has some value. But you know what? Here's some other Lego. And you might think, oh, for goodness sakes, how can all those pieces go together? What a mishmash. I mean, do they even belong together? That's kind of hard to imagine that. And yet, maybe one of these gifts is the gift of administration, represented by the black color here. And then maybe the white is the gift of mercy. And you start to put those things together. And then, of course, yellow has to be the gift of encouragement. And so you add some encouragement to it. And how are we going to connect these together? Well, maybe we'll use this window here and we'll put that on there. And that might be the gift of wisdom. And then what else have we got here? All right, we've got the gift of teaching. And maybe we've got some more of the gift of mercy. And we'll add to that some of the gift of giving. There. And for this clear one, that can be the gift of administration. There, that's starting to look pretty good. And then the artists, you know, they like things of different shapes. So there's a nice, interesting shape, and they can put the icing on the cake. Don't they bring, it's just like a cake, and a cake tastes pretty good, but boy, you add the icing, and then it's really good. And then we can add, oh, let's see what else we got here. Oh, we've got some wheels. Those would be the gift of intercession. And what do you do with that gift by itself? Well, maybe you add that. There's red, so that would be the gift of teaching. And black, of course, is the gift of administration. And so we can add some administration and a little bit of teaching together. And you say, what's administration got to do with intercession, well, just think about our prayer chain. Does the prayer chain, that's an administrative thing. Does that add anything to the gift of intercession? Absolutely. And so instead of just having a static structure, now we can start to put some wheels under it, and that can actually go somewhere. And then we have over here these gears. These might be the prophetic gifting. And so again, we add some administration to that and a bit of teaching. And we can put these things together. I put that on here. Now we've really got something. Not only that, but we've got something that God can use and that can really do something. But if you were to take even one of these gifts out of here, if you were to say, oh, we don't need those encourager guys, what? Well, the thing is broken. It won't work. And we need all of these gifts functioning together. And they give you something that has color and vibrance and function, and they can actually go somewhere and do something. And so that is how the gifts operate together. And when they operate together, they can do amazing things that one gift can't do, and that even a bunch of people with identical gifts cannot do. But as soon as you have these gifts working together, there are natural tensions and conflicts, and they need to work together because God has made them different. And so there's just this natural focus on different things, but they have to work together. And when they do, God can do some really amazing things. And just to close, I'm going to go back to my screen share here. You see, God has the master plan, and he has strategies and tactics in mind. And he's created people, and some of those people actually know him, and some of them don't. And God wants to send messages to both of those groups of people. Maybe the circles represent people who know God and are born again, and maybe the hexagons people who don't yet. And God speaks to all of them. And he has us as individuals ministering to each other, to other believers and to people who are not believers. Does that matter? Does it matter that we have all of those gifts operating and operating together and ministering to somebody who is discouraged, or somebody who is sick, or somebody who just needs to be cheered up a bit? And not only that, but sometimes God needs us all to work together in order to do something that's bigger. Think about the food drive. Did you see all those pictures, the picture of all those people standing in the front lawn of the church? We couldn't have done the food drive if they hadn't all worked together. And so that's one of the reasons that God has made the church. You see, if you think about an individual, an individual couldn't, say, make a train system. You need a big company like CNR or something in order to lay the tracks and buy all the fancy equipment and the locomotives and the tracks and the train cars and all those things. But CN is a big company, and they have the power to do certain things and bring us all kinds of advantages. And the same is true of the church. There are things that individuals can't do, but when they work together, when they form together into a functioning collective that God calls the church, then there are important things that we can do together as a church. And so God speaks to the church, and the church speaks to individuals, and individuals speak to the church, just like they did this morning. Gudrun spoke to the church this morning. God spoke to her, and she spoke to us. And the same can be said of many of the things that happened this morning and that happened from week to week, sometimes in the services, sometimes out of the services. And so again, today's message was to serve as kind of a belt to tie the gifts together before we focus on the manifestation gifts, and to encourage you to use your gifts to minister to your neighbors and your family and others in the church. And when we're allowed to open our doors, maybe to operate, to let those gifts operate in our services as well. And so may God bless you as you think about the gifting that God has given you, and you think about how can you use it this week. Blessings on you.